Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we are diving deep into a really crucial topic for your IB psychology course, the complex relationship between stress and your health. We're going to break down all the essential theories, the must-know studies, and those all-important evaluation points that you're going to need to ace your exams. So let's just start with a big question right off the bat. Is stress always a bad thing? I mean, we talk about being stressed out all the time, and it always sounds negative, right? But from a psychological standpoint, the answer is, well, it's a lot more nuanced than that. We're going to keep coming back to this question as we go. All right, so here's our game plan for today. We'll start with the basics. What even is stress? Then we'll get into the biology. What's happening in your body? After that, we'll look at the mind's role in all this. We'll even tackle a modern case study on stress and social media. And of course, we'll wrap up with how to evaluate all this evidence and some final thoughts on ethics. Okay, let's jump right into our first section. What is stress? To really get a handle on how stress and health are linked, we've got to make sure we're all on the same page with the definitions. Let's start with the big one, stress itself. All right, so at the very heart of how our bodies work is this idea called homeostasis. Think of it like your body's internal thermostat. It wants to keep everything just right. Not too hot, not too cold, just perfectly balanced. That's its optimal state. Now, stress, in a biological sense, is literally anything that knocks that thermostat out of whack. A stressor is what we call the thing that does the knocking, and your body has to burn a ton of energy to get things back to that balanced state. So this brings us to a really famous definition from the biologist Hans Sully. He said stress is the non-specific response of the body to any demand placed upon it. Now, that word non-specific is absolutely crucial. What Saya was saying is that it doesn't matter if you're facing down a tiger, a final exam, or a tough conversation. Your body's initial biological reaction is pretty much the same. It's the response itself that Saya defined as stress. And hey, this brings us right back to that question we started with. Is stress always bad? Well, Sully himself would say no way. He made this really important distinction between eustress and distress. Eustress is actually good stress. Think about an athlete training for a competition. That pressure helps them get stronger. It's a positive challenge. Distress, well, that's the one we all think about. It's the negative stuff that just hangs around and wears you down, causing real problems. Okay, another key distinction you absolutely need for your IB course is acute versus chronic stress. Acute stress is the short-term stuff, like you're stuck in traffic and late for something. Your body is a rock star at handling these short bursts of panic. But chronic stress, that's the real villain in this story. This is the long-term, grinding pressure from things like poverty or a really demanding job. Our bodies are just not designed to have that alarm bell ringing 24/7. All right, so now that we've got the concepts down, let's get into the nitty-gritty. Section 2, the body's alarm system. We're going to look at what's actually happening inside your body, the pure biology of stress. You've all heard of this one, the fight or flight response. This is our ancient, built-in survival kit. It's this super fast cascade of events. First, your brain spots a threat. Bam! That flips a switch, activating your sympathetic nervous system. Then a flood of stress hormones gets released. And finally, your whole body is primed and ready for action to either fight for your life or run like heck. Okay, so this diagram shows you exactly how that biological chain reaction works. Just follow the main path here. It all starts in the brain, specifically the pituitary gland. It shoots out a hormone called ACTH. That ACTH travels down to the adrenal glands, which sit right on top of your kidneys, and tells them go time. They then pump out adrenaline and cortisol. And those are the hormones that cause all the physical stuff you feel, your heart pounding, and your body shutting down things it doesn't need right now, like digestion. So let's zero in on these two chemical messengers, adrenaline and cortisol. Adrenaline is the one that gives you that instant jolt of energy. Your heart rate goes up, blood pressure spikes. Cortisol is kind of its partner in crime. It's the one that keeps you on high alert. It dumps glucose or sugar into your bloodstream for fuel and basically tells all non-essential systems to take a break. Your immune system, your digestion, even growth processes, they all get put on the back burner. Now, this is brilliant if you're escaping a lion, but you can probably see how this becomes a massive problem when it's switched on all the time. Okay, but here's the thing. Biology is only half the picture. What's going on in your head is just as important, if not more so. This brings us to section 3, the mind's interpretation. The key idea here is that a situation isn't stressful on its own. It's how you think about it, your cognitive appraisal. that decides whether that whole biological alarm system even gets turned on. And this idea is the absolute core of the transactional model of stress and coping from Lazarus and Folkman. This was a game changer. They basically said, look, stress isn't something that just happens to you. It's a two-way street, a transaction between you and your environment. And the middleman in that transaction is your brain, your thoughts. So how does this work? It starts with something called primary appraisal. This is your brain's first super quick gut check. You're basically asking, is this a big deal for me? Am I in trouble here? And you can decide the situation is totally irrelevant, maybe even positive. Or you can decide it's a threat. Think about a pop quiz. For one student, that's a major threat. For another, it's an exciting challenge. Same event, totally different appraisal. Now, if your brain decides, yep, this is stressful, then you immediately jump to secondary appraisal. And the question here changes to, okay, what can I do about it? This is where you size up your own toolbox. Do you have what it takes to handle this? The knowledge, the skills, the friends to help you out? If you think, yeah, I got this, the stress is pretty low. But if you look at the problem and then look at your resources and think, oh no, I'm out of my depth, that's when the real distress starts. All right, let's take all this theory and apply it to something we all deal with. Section 4, stress and social media. We're going to look at how these models play out in the digital world, focusing on a key study you should know. So, a really important study here is Zhao and Zhao from 2021. What they wanted to know was pretty simple. Is there a link between the stress people felt during the COVID-19 pandemic and social media addiction? So they did a correlational study. They surveyed over 700 college students and measured a few key things: how much stress they were under, their level of addictive social media use, and this interesting state called flow, which we'll get to in a sec. And the results? Well, you can see them right here in the table. They were really clear. There was a significant positive correlation. Now, what does that mean in plain English? It means the more stress a student said they were feeling, the more likely they were to have addictive social media habits and to get into that flow state online. Okay, but this brings up a huge question, a really critical one for evaluation. How in the world do you reliably measure something like flow? You know, that feeling where you're so into something you completely lose track of time? It's totally subjective, right? It's an internal feeling. And the Zhao and Zhao study used self-report questionnaires. So you have to ask yourself, how accurate can that really be? Well, another study by Chirel and his team in 2018 found a pretty clever, more objective way to look at this. They looked at something called time distortion. Here's what they did. They had students do a 20-minute task where they couldn't check their phones. Then they simply asked them, how long do you think that took? And check out the results on this chart. The students at low risk for addiction were pretty much spot on, guessing around 18 minutes. But the high-risk group, they guessed it took 28 minutes, a huge overestimation. This suggests that how we perceive time could be a much more objective marker for addiction risk. And all this talk about measurement leads us perfectly into our next section, evaluating the evidence. Because as you know, for IB psychology, just knowing the studies isn't enough. You have to think critically about them. So let's break down some of the big issues with this kind of research. The number one problem is causality. Remember, the Zhao and Zhu study was correlational. That means it can show a link, but it can't prove that one thing causes the other. It's the classic chicken and egg situation. Are people turning to social media because they're stressed? Or is being on social media all the time, with all the social comparison and FOMO actually making them stressed? The data can't tell us which way the arrow points. So here are the 3 big evaluation points you should have in your back pocket. First, causality. We just covered that. Correlation doesn't equal causation. Second, measurement and bias. These studies almost always rely on people telling the truth on surveys, and we know that's not always reliable. And third, you've got the problem of pre-existing groups. You can't just randomly assign people to an addiction group, right? That would be totally unethical. So you have to study people who already have these issues, which makes it super hard to know if it's the social media or something else entirely that's causing the problem. Okay, and finally, let's touch on something really important, the ethics of this kind of research. And then we'll wrap up with a final big picture thought. So imagine you're a researcher studying addiction. You're in a tough spot. You want your research to help people, obviously. But what if the study itself could actually cause harm? Think about it. If you give someone a really detailed questionnaire all about their addictive behaviors, couldn't that act as a trigger? It might make them think about it more, and maybe even lead to a relapse. It's a serious ethical line to walk, and protecting participants has to be the top priority. And that leaves us with one last big, thought-provoking question to chew on. And this ties in perfectly with TOK, your Theory of Knowledge course. Our biological stress response, that fight or flight system, is ancient. It evolved to save us from, lions and tigers. But our world today is brand new. It's filled with constant digital psychological stressors. So the question is, what happens when our ancient biology crashes into our modern world? What does this massive mismatch mean for our health and well-being in the long run?